So good afternoon, Philippe. It's a real pleasure to have you join me in this new episode of Making Risk Flow. Perhaps we start with an introduction of yourself. I think your background and experience is really fascinating. So if you can start with an overview of your background, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, thanks, Juan, for having me, and thanks for the fascinating. I hope I'm not going to disappoint here. So in a few minutes, I spent 20 years with AXA XL in its various forms. And I was lucky in that time to have different roles. I think more recently I ran our shared service operation in India for 5 years. The big back office operation, which grew from 300 people to 1,000 people during my tenure. I was based in New Delhi. Fabulous experience. And then after that, as we were merging with Catlin, I became the COO for XL Catlin at the time in Asia Pacific, sort of covering the entire region, APAC region. And the role over there was a lot more kind of front end, driving expansion strategy in the region, and also integrating with Catlin first. And then when AXA bought XL Catlin in 2018, driving integration with AXA and the collaboration with the local AXA entities. So these were it's my last 12 years of AXA XL and spent in Asia. And then I was starting to think the COVID years were complicated, lockdowns and so forth. So it was time for me to kind of reflect a bit on what I wanted to do. And I realized it was time for me to change. I wanted to revert to a kind of maybe smaller, a leaner company with a different culture, focusing on slightly more entrepreneurial, with a good growth, strategy and investments to support it. So I decided to leave XXL and I joined Howden a few months ago. It's just been 2.5 months. I'm the COO for Howden Europe. So Howden Europe, so that you understand, is everything except the UK. So all European countries, so from the Nordics all the way down to Israel. We have 19 countries in scope, and it's a great story in that it's got very ambitious growth plans. We've doubled the revenue in the last 2 years. We plan to double again in the next 3 years. And I'm part of the European leadership team, so it's a very small team of 5 people. We want to be very lean at the center, just to effectively reflect the fact that everything happens in country, and our role is to help set the strategy and accompany the countries in their plans. So I've been doing this for 2.5 months, and my first observation, it's first of all, great company, culture is terrific, good people, and there's a buzz and an opportunity which I'm really pleased about.
Yeah, and then there's definitely a buzz in the market about what Howden is doing, right? It's a fantastic growth story with a fantastic culture. So I'm sure it will deliver on everything you were looking for. And I think part of what I said when in terms of your background is fascinating. Obviously, you've got 20 years of experience in an insurer, but now you've moved to the broking side. So to some extent, you bring all the knowledge of how does it feel to transact or to do business with brokers. So let's start there. Like, what is your vision for broking? What are your strategic objectives and priorities at Howden?
Yeah, so my vision for broking, bear in mind, it's still emerging, right? It's only 2.5 months old, so I can't really pretend to have it covered at all. But and there's also a lot of similarities between what we do on the broking side and the carrier side for the areas I'm covering. The ops, data, and so forth. But I think the vision, if I were to look at what I've done in the last few weeks, I've spent a lot of time traveling across our countries. I really want to go and see the operation, spend time with the teams. And I think what's super clear, right from the outset, is the vision. It's not one vision. It's not going to be a one size fits all. It's very far from being homogeneous. So what I mean by this is, we're largely a retail broker, but we also have pockets of wholesale. We do also reinsurance, fac and treaty. We operate across the whole range of product classes, P&C, life, A&H, EB. We have different distribution channels. We have bank insurance arrangements in some countries. From a client segmentation, again, it's the whole range, from personal lines, high net worth, commercial fleet, SME, mid-market, large commercial. So it's the entire sort of value chain. There's a language bit. Sometimes people forget that Europe is a collection of countries, and we have people in the north who speak Finnish, people in the south speak Hebrew, and it's very different languages. So again, you can't deploy one vision, one set of solution to everyone, because there are some real strong country specifics. We have different regulatory environments. So take the Nordics, for example. In the Nordics, a broker is not allowed by law to receive brokerage from insurance companies. So all the money comes from the client. So it's like a consulting agreement with the client. Data protection, different data privacy rules, whether you handle client money or direct to insurers, whether you do claims handling or not. So in other words, it's a multitude of facets, and therefore, when I think about vision, it's not actually a set. People think about is there one system which can be used for everything? The answer is probably, of course, not. But what's, for me, the thing that brings it all together is data. How you look at the data that you need throughout the value chain just to be successful. And I think I will look very much at this in 4 areas. Is the data you need upstream when you manage your sales pipeline. It's really the stuff you do before you even have the clients on board, number one, and I'll re-explain what I mean in a minute. Then step 2 is how you bring the client on board, the intake of the client, all the information you need to capture on the risk from the client, just to make sure that you place it properly and then you get the right cover. Number 3, obviously, is the placement part. How you go, and explain your client needs to the carriers that you work with, understand their appetite, and how you match risk with appetite. And then number 4 is once you've done all this, how do you keep your client? All the servicing part, just to make sure that the client receives the services that you've promised. A broker promises a service, largely around risk cover and claims. So all the things that all the data points that we have to capture throughout that value chain I just talked about, to ensure that there is actually a superior service at the end. And you do all this in a way to get obviously the best adequacy between cover and risks, and minimize the gaps, the underinsurance, minimize the pocket of risk which you're not able to insure. So that's really the view. It's a data driven approach all along, just to meet those various objectives.
That's really beautiful. To some extent, we could say that data is bridging the gaps across all those cultures and different countries, which is what you mentioned at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So it would be fantastic to deep dive into. I think you mentioned 4 areas in terms of the role of the broker, and then we'd love to talk about that underinsurance at the end. It's a topic I'm passionate of addressing. But if we start with managing the sales pipeline, that was the first area you mentioned. What is the role of data there? What else are you thinking about doing?
Yeah, so here I think it's really understand the universe of prospects you have, and this is where I think the expertise of the country CEOs, the account executives we have in country is essential for them to understand what's out there. What is the opportunity? All the potential future clients. Understand who has relationships already with those future prospects, and that could be through personal relationship. And often you deal with small territories where everyone knows each other. It's a bit like in London when you walk in the Lord's area, everyone knows each other. But it's the same when you go to Greece, or when you go to Israel, or when you go to Norway. So existing relationship. It could also be through groups, CFO forums, connection with venture capitalists, lawyers, non-execs. So there's different ways of understanding, how you could get access to those clients. And then it's about gathering the basic info. So at this stage, you want to have the basic information on the prospects. Who are the current brokers? Who are the carriers? What are the risks that are being insured? What are the inception dates? It's important to know that, because then you can start to make your pitch when those risks actually renew. And we've seen some of our countries having even telemarketing teams, calling those companies and just trying to get this information and feed all this into a repository, a CRM type of capability where you capture all this. And for me, this is step number one. So you start to build that bulk of information, which then you use. So it doesn't sit on its own. It's not standalone. This information, it then feeds into your broking tools once you have the clients on board. So that's step number one, is that data capture of the universe, manage, how you go about, winning those accounts, the penetration, and so forth. So that's pretty much the upfront part. Yeah.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And something, for example, one of the traditional challenges with that type of data is it gets outdated. Probably not, or perhaps not in a small country, right? But like in a large geography, where probably you're holding that data in a CRM or a similar system, that data tends to get outdated over time, right? Is there anything you're thinking about using external data or other data for two purposes? One could be to refresh that information, but I guess more importantly, as a broker, identify what are the triggers where a potential customer might need additional coverage, which might be the right point of the customer journey, right?
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. I think this data is only useful if it's fresh, if it's current. And you're right. It could very quickly become stale if you don't manage it. So putting a big bunch of data in a CRM type of system and then leaving it on its own, it's going to become obsolete in very short term. So you want to keep it current. And I think the way you do this, as you capture the data, you want to try to link those names to sort of database like Dun & Bradstreet, so you can start to have a group architecture, and DNB would actually, Dun & Bradstreet will actually tell you when there's a change in the group structure. So you keep your client structure kind of current. Then you can hook up to different databases. You need to read the press, obviously, and stay up to date on what's going on. So. But it's an effort in itself to maintain it, and that's why most of our countries have teams of the marketing team that do only this to keep the pipeline current to the best extent possible.
Yeah. But you're going to even eventually
get rating information if those clients are rated. If you're able to actually attach a rating, and then there's a rating event, upgrade or downgrade, you can capture this as well. So there's different ways of keeping it current, but in itself, it's often manual to try to stay up to date on what's going on in the industry.
I guess that's part of the challenge. Is how can you enable that to be a much more automated process where you are capturing information, capturing those triggers, right? So something, for example, just to give you an example of what we're seeing with some of our clients is, okay, can you identify when a client is raising their first funding round? Because that might mean they're setting up a board of directors. They might then need DNO, right? Those might be the right triggers to then reach out to a potential new customer. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the example of third party, feed that you would take into your type of database of information just to keep it current. But I want people to remember that it's important not to underestimate the amount of time and importance that this has, because this is ground zero. You have to have this if you want to sort of, then once the prospect becomes a client, you can feed a lot of knowledge from this upfront effort on the marketing side.
Definitely.
So maybe it's a good segue to what happens once you've done the pipeline, right?
Exactly. So then you've done the pipeline, you identified a potential customer, then you're about to get into the onboarding phase. Like, what happens there?
So I think what happens there once the prospect becomes a client, once the relationship is established and there's an agreement to join forces, it's important to start first of all to leverage whatever information you've captured in upstream, in your CRM type of capability, and then start to enrich it. So this information is normally fairly basic, and then you would want to have conversations with your clients just to add data, which the account executives will capture. So it's just obviously getting a view of the risks that the client has, the location, the number of employees, the revenues, just the entire universe of data points, which has to be captured during that phase. And this is generally stuff that you do through face-to-face interactions, unless you're talking about the sort of SME type of clients where you can have maybe a portal where the client by itself would feed this information into your data capture, and then this information is effectively structured in the portal so that there's less human intervention to do this.
Yep, and in that stage is a priority of yours thinking like, okay, I guess a couple of challenges I've heard before are things like, okay, how do you drive a consistent data capture? Right, so how do you make sure that all your brokers interacting with those clients are consistently capturing the right information, and it doesn't become just like a filling out a form, but you're like really tailoring the conversation to the specific client, right?
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because when I was thinking about this phase, there's a huge education piece with the account execs, precisely to make them really aware of the importance to do this right, and you have to define what the various data elements are. You must even have to do this across countries, because at the end, when you deal with multinational clients, you want to capture the same information in the same way. Client should be the same whether it's in Germany or in Estonia. Location or employees or revenues should be defined in the same way. So there is a bit of defining the data element themselves, and make sure that the account execs are trained to capture what's relevant in our library of information. You're going to need all this, as we're very clear. So that this data capture is obviously to create the relationship with the client and make sure that you create the long-lasting relationship. But then you're going to use it for the next step, which is the placement part. If you don't have a really good understanding of your client, their risk, and so forth, you're going to start to place a risk which you haven't fully understood, and then it's going to become really like shooting in the dark. You're going to go to multiple markets, and it's going to be very inefficient. And as a result, you risk that the covers you're going to end up with won't be fit for purpose for the risk. So super important to get that phase of data capture during your client intake right.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the in that onboarding stage, definitely one goal is to capture the data, but as a broker, also a very important role is how you advise your client on any action the client can do to get the best quotes. And often in certain lines, actually the client can do things to get a better quote, or a perfect example would be in cyber, right? Where you could say, hey, to a client, hey, do you know if sounds like you don't have multi-factor authentication, that's going to be a challenge to get the best quote. You could do X, Y, and Z. So almost, do you envision a world where you knew how your markets or how the insurers are rating a given risk, and almost advise your client on the changes they can make to the risk profile to get the better quote?
Yeah. So yeah, and we're going to talk about this in a bit in the placement phase, but but I think you're absolutely right. The relationship between the client and the broker will become long lasting if there is a sense of of service, and that's obviously easy to say, but the truth is clients value exactly what we just mentioned, Juan, the extra bit, so which is either risk engineering, so having engineers being able to go and inspect the client's facility and advise on mitigation techniques against fire, against flooding, and so forth, or you can also have sensors that you can have the client deploy again to detect anomalies in either levels of water or heat or cold, actually, for that matter, in the temperature. You mentioned cyber, and I'm going to talk about cyber a bit later, but I think cyber is a great example also where we have developed in-house, but also we bring in third-party capabilities to go and explain to our clients, what could go wrong, and God knows a lot of stuff can go wrong in that part. So there's an entire sort of area of risk mitigation techniques which we see very essential for the broker to deploy, just to get a better sense for the risk themselves, and then be able to actually then explain those risks to the carriers during the placement side.
Yeah,
and the client values a lot those services.
Yeah, and I think this is also I would assume a way of you differentiating from other brokers, right? Is that advisory role, which is obviously a crucial one as a broker. So perhaps that leads us to the next stage that you mentioned, which is placement.
Yeah. So again, you just follow your value chain. So you gather the data up front, in the pre-sale. You enriched that data during the onboarding, which gives you then the bulk of information which is at which you have available to start to say, okay, well, how am I going to go and place those risks? And here it's very important to understand what's happening downstream. So knowing your market, knowing your capacity providers, and again, this is where local expertise is essential. Just in my travels in all the countries, when I always ask, the CEOs and the account execs, who do you deal with? They don't have, they don't shoot in the dark. They don't send, unlike some territories where brokers will send requests for quote to 50 carriers. It's all very niche and targeted because they know exactly the carriers which provide what. They understand the appetites. They constantly, just staying tuned in with the carriers about appetite and so forth. And they're able, therefore, to make the placement fairly efficient by going to only those who are likely to provide the best cover. And it's all about getting the best cover. And I know price is important, and the client ultimately will have a view on price, but the broker is very much there to just make sure that you get the best cover for the risks. And sometimes the thing we haven't talked about is some of our territories, we have our own wordings. So the wordings are recognized by the industry, and that even the carriers want to adopt. So it's important to get the best cover for the risk, and you do this by knowing what your carriers' appetites are. So how do you make this efficient? Again, it's about the data. You can try to automate this. So there's multiple examples in our universe in Europe where you have broker portals, again for this for the simpler risks, where you can put out effectively on the portal the risks you want to be insured, and the carriers will come and effectively make their own proposals against those risks. It's all about digitizing the process where you possibly can, and then the other part is how to make once the risk has been bound, how to digitize, make self-service a possibility as well for the client to be able to retrieve their certificates, for the client to know where their claims are when there are claims. So there's a lot of focus that we have at the moment just to make this as integrated and digitized as possible, by creating that effectively tripartite digital link between the client, us, and the insurers.
And in that placement phase, one of the challenges we hear insurers often talk about is that back and forth between the broker and the insurer, about like a broker sending a proposal form to an insurer, then the insurer going back with, well, I need to know X, Y, and Z, and well, you didn't include what are the top 10 products that in kind of client is manufacturing, whatever it is and you were talking about the efficiency in that process, right? That feels like quite a source of inefficiency. Is that something that you think also data could help your brokers understand like what information that each insurer needs to be able to provide a quote?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as I said, the cleaner the upfront data is on the risks, the less back and forth you're going to have, and that brings me back to my days in Excel, where we had a big global program business, where we used to underwrite global programs, with policies issued in multiple territories. So when you're on the incoming side of those policy, you have to we used to have a risk in Bhutan for a very large client, and it was a $2,500 local policy, which you spend maybe $15,000 just to actually put in place, because the data wasn't clean, the instruction to the local fronting company wasn't clear. So there was constant back and forth. Which currency do we have to do this? Is it in Indian rupee, because Bhutan using Indian rupee? Was it in US dollar? And you spend huge amount of time and money just for something which is in itself, it doesn't bring you that revenue. So if you have the data clean up front, if the producing office, broker, underwriter have very clear instructions, it's a data set that goes to the incoming fronting companies, then it's easier to issue a policy. But if you don't get it right, it's going to be a lot of back and forth emails and very inefficient.
Yeah.
There's zillions of examples in that space.
Yeah, and then again, that is now done through the experience of your frontline. I mean, hopefully in the future this will be done in a more automated way, right? So like where you're in front of a client and exactly what data points. So the technology tells you exactly what data points each of the insurers might need to be able to quote it. Yeah,
it's done through experience of frontline, but I think there's more and more efforts to actually automate this by creating instruction tools, where effectively at the center, once the risk is placed, in the master policy is placed, instructions are created and go automatically to the countries where local policies have to be issued, and then so there is less ambiguity as to what's required. It's a lot more joined up. But obviously, global program is a very complicated area and often subject to very manual work. But it's a good example where data is essential just to reduce those frictional costs, which are so inefficient, right?
No, definitely. Okay, so that we talked about placement. You touched on a couple of areas already in terms of servicing, right? Providing kind of claims information, copy of documents, etc. Is there anything else in that space where you think data could be an enabler?
Well, so I was kind of thinking about this, and I think this is really here more a process. Instead of the data you would expect is there because you already, the risk has been bound. I think it's about that continuous engagement with the client, just to understand what's changed, how risks have evolved, how needs have evolved, how tolerance to risk may change. Some client may want to retain more self-retention. Those parameters may change, and that engagement needs to be. It's more than once a year. I sit down and let's review your risk. Same as last year. There you go. It's that it has to be done very regularly. I think there's also during that service part, which has a data component, is obviously the claims part. When you deal with, I guess all clients, but they want their claims swiftly handled. But there are specific clients, for which it's essential to keep them, high net worth. Reported claim has to be handled in literally, hours. It's not weeks. So weekend, night. If you have a client where you insure, private art collections, you insure classic cars, you insure yachts, and we have those clients. They exist. Claim service is super important, and this is where I think getting that super responsive approach, is important. But all the rest is more, a process to accompany the client in the risk assessment, risk mitigation, and so risk engineering, Internet of Things, sensors, use of technology is a very important component to make the relationship sticky. You want the client to effectively want to stay with you because he loves you.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the points you mentioned there was about understanding whether the risk profile of a given client has changed over the course of the policy or not, right? And I think obviously that is something which is really important for you guys as a broker, but it's also a very large source of inefficiency for insurers, right? So for an insurer having to manually review their existing policies in their book every year, it's very much a high capacity consuming activity. We hear from some of our clients things like 60% of their renewal book going to automatically renew, but more than 50% of that portion coming back from the broker saying, well, we need to make some changes to the policy. So I guess this is an area where probably insurers and brokers could work better together and better use data to identify, has anything changed in the risk profile? If so, obviously that policy needs touching. If not, it should be like a streamlined renewal process for the customer, right?
Yeah, and it's probably something which, I think you're right, and it's probably something that doesn't really happen enough. And it's just it feels like this is exercise only undertaken, at policy renewal, as far as the insurer is concerned. Whereas in all fairness, as the broker stays in touch with its client throughout the year, that should feed into the insurer during the policy when the policy is in force, so as to be able to make the renewal as seamless as possible. I think there's still a long way to go in that area, in particular for large commercial risks, actually.
Yeah, no, definitely. Okay, so I think these are the 4 steps you mentioned at the beginning: the kind of the managing the sales pipeline, onboarding, placement, and servicing. But I really like the point you made at the very beginning. At the end, the use of data across all these 4 stages ultimately is to help advise your clients and address risk of underinsurance.
Yes, it's to address risk of underinsurance and how to make sure that at the end of the process, you reach the situation where your client's risks have been covered. What is not covered, there is a clear understanding by the client as to what is self-insuring and what it retains. And here, I think there's I think here the role of the broker is to try to stay very innovative. We know there are areas which are complicated. I think cyber, everyone knows that cyber is an area which where the risk of underinsurance is high. And I think the stuff we just talked about, bringing third-party expertise or even in-house expertise when you have very people that are very good with cyber to advise a client, test their defenses, do penetration tests and so forth, will help minimize the risk that a cyber risk remains uninsured. But you're going to have to do it through using innovation. Another area which is very topical is crypto. There's very few carriers that are willing to actually get into crypto. I was in Israel the last few days. Big market in cyber and crypto, and a lot of risks in crypto are just not insured because no one wants to touch them. And again, here for the brokers, it's trying to sort of see, okay, so if the traditional markets don't want to touch crypto, do we see some of the more emerging, insure tech ventures who have a different attitude to risk, who are prepared to take it? But that's a very complicated area. Another one which is interesting is in life science, the use of cannabis, in medical products. Some carriers don't want to touch cannabis. It's just part of the ESG policy, and some of them exclude use of those type of medicine. So the broker here has to be very aware of what the insurer's appetite are and underwriting guidelines, and be able to guide their clients through that, navigate through those maze of regulation, policies and so forth around the things, and remain completely up to on top of innovation, product innovation, new products or what new carriers solutions that they want to provide. Yeah,
and underinsurance is one of those areas where, I would hope we as an industry will make much more progress in the next few years, because first of all, because the incentives are aligned. And when incentives are aligned, the problem should be easier to solve, right? So so underinsurance is obviously an issue for the client, because in the event of a claim, they might not be fully covered. It's an issue for the broker, right? From not just because it's an opportunity for getting more commission, but more importantly, it's to be able to provide a better service to the client, and it's also an issue for the insurer, who then you get into this litigation around claims if there was underinsurance, and actually what we are seeing is, well, in the last few years, which is a great progress in the industry, some insurers removing the average clause, for example, right? If they have enough certainty that the broker has advised the client on the right kind of limits and covers. So I would hope this is an area where the whole industry makes significant progress in the next few years. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's always interesting when you see those big weather events, or earthquakes, sort of big cats, and you look at the value of the economic losses and the value of insured losses. There's always there's always something, there's a shortfall in between, because some risks are simply not covered. And I think the role of the insurance industry in general, not only the brokers but also the carriers, to try to close that gap. Part of the mission, part of what you give back to society. Yeah.
Exactly, and some of them is just because they're not covered. Some of them is because the reported sums insured are lower than reality, right? And again, we see some of our clients looking at things like using data around rebuild cost assessments to better inform clients about the kind of the right level of sum insured. So yeah, I mean, really fascinating, all these topics, and I'm, as I said, I'm sure like bringing your knowledge and experience from an insurer into broking, I think you will be able to reach all these challenges and align them across the value chain. Before wrapping up, actually, I would love to just ask you for a fun fact. So, which I've asked some of my guests, which is if you had the opportunity to go out for dinner with somebody in the insurance industry, who would you go out with?
Oh dear. Okay. Right. Such a big industry. So, who would I go dinner with? So, okay. So I think I would, if I could, I would have two dates. I would have dinner with Warren Buffett.
Definitely.
He for me, he's just like, Warren Buffett. Yeah. Everything he brings, just his attitude to investment, risk, insurance. For me, it's just like incredible man. Reading the annual report, just the stuff he writes about his view of the world is just fascinating. And my second date, I would just go the other side of the spectrum. I would try to go with the CEO of a cool insurtech company in the crypto cyber world. I do find those things very fascinating. I don't understand crypto very well, but I know it's a big deal, especially at the moment with all the things happening in that space, and just to understand how the guys think about insurance. It's interesting. When I was in my Singapore days, we used to have some kind of tie-ups with insurtech. It's kind of think tank, and we had some bright kids, effectively they were kids, coming and talk to us about the ideas they have to use tools to transform unstructured data to structured data, and those guys have a good idea, but they don't understand insurance. So it's how do you bring the two together? So yeah, I would have those two dates.
That makes a lot of sense. And hopefully in this latter one, you would also find capacity for your crypto risks that you can.
Yes. Not mine personally, but because it's just too small to require insurance. But for the crypto exchanges, the wallets and so forth, which are struggling to find cover.
Definitely. Well, Philippe, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on this episode of the podcast. I'm very, very glad you found a new home at Howden. Sounds like a fantastic role in a superb company. So best of luck, and hopefully you'll join me for a future episode again. Thank you.
I'm sure I will. Thank you for having me. Take care.